Okay, so good morning, everyone. And thank you for the nice introduction and invitation here. I'm working, as Henrik said, in Brno in Czech Republic. And here you can see our Faculty of Medicine of Masaryk University and Associated University Hospital. So we are a workplace where you can do many things at one place. And actually, most of our team are both clinicians and researchers. So I work at the Department of Psychiatry as a DBT therapist and also in the research of BPD. And in this talk, I would like to first take a step back and to kind of explain our view of borderline personality disorder. Then we will have a look on the neurocorrelates of BPD, what do we know now, and then how it translates to effective treatments of BPD. And I will specifically talk about 3 treatment modalities we do at our workplace, which is fMRI neurofeedback, brain stimulation, and of course psychotherapy. So what actually is BPD? So we suppose that people with BPD are born emotionally sensitive. So when you have a look at this very easy curve of emotions, so emotions come and go, what we can see in patients with BPD is that their emotions go more quickly to higher intensity and they go down slower. So when you ask patients or their families, we often hear that already as small children or babies, they were very emotional. They cried a lot, or they were angry a lot, or they had very hard separation processes and so on. So it's important to say that being emotionally sensitive, it's not a bad thing. So when patients come to treatment, they often come with the opinion that emotions are bad and they don't want them. So this is also what we tell them. And probably many of us in this room are emotionally sensitive because emotional sensitivity comes also with high empathy, which brings many people to helping professions, right? And also you have high positive emotions, so you can have very intense life. Often it also comes with high creativity. And this is what Martin Bohus often says, what I like, that BPD patients are emotionally gifted, actually. So this is just to kind of tear down the negative view on emotional sensitivity. So being emotional is not a bad thing, but when an emotionally sensitive child is raised in systematically invalidating environment, it can be a problem and BPD can be developed. So what actually is invalidating environment? It means that your emotions are systematically ignored, criticized, invalidated from the people around you. So you can imagine a small sensitive child whose toy falls on the ground and breaks. So he's very, very sad, cries a lot, and an invalidating response can be stop crying, you're overreacting, it's just a toy, you have no reason to cry. So of course, we all have heard these things, we all have said these things. So invalidation like this is nothing tragical per se, but if it's a systematic reactions on emotions in sensitive children, it can be problematic because it says that your emotions are bad. It doesn't tell you what to do with them. And as we know, emotions are automatic, so we don't choose what we start to feel. And importantly, when emotions are invalidated, their intensity increases because emotions are there for our survival. So our brain wants us and the environment to listen to the emotions. And when we or the environment don't listen, don't react to the emotions, the brain just goes higher with the emotion to make us listen. So if this happens a million times in the invalidating environment, the emotional reactivity just gets higher. Moreover, patients typically start to suppress their own emotions because they feel rejected when they're emotional. So it's natural you want to hide the emotions later. But the problem is, again, that the emotional suppression again leads to higher emotional reactivity. And we have some metaphors we use for that. When you suppress your emotion, it seems like it went away, but in fact, it just went to the gym. and it got stronger, and it will come back and beat you up. So this is one of the DBT metaphors, how we motivate people, why they should stop suppressing their emotions. And important thing is that the invalidating environment doesn't teach you what to do with the emotions. So emotionally supportive reaction could be something like, I just hug the child, right? Or I tell him it's okay to cry, or we will now go play outside and it will be better, or we can try to repair the toy, or we can buy a new one. And in this way, the child is being taught that when I'm very sad, it helps when somebody I like hugs me, when I can cry, it helps to divert attention. Sometimes we can repair things and so on. And this is the reason why people coming from invalidating environment don't have emotion regulation skills. And this is a crucial thing in BPD because they have high emotions and they don't have the healthy skills how to regulate them. So it's not just emotional intensity disorder, it's emotional regulation disorder. Of course, invalidation like this leads to negative self-concept, feeling alone, misunderstood. And also what happens often is that the invalidating environment reinforces maladaptive behaviors and extreme reactions. So again, typical example is that you have an adolescent girl with emotional dysregulation, so she cannot really describe her emotions and needs well. And you have invalidating people around who don't really respond to the emotions and needs of lower intensity. But once she self-harms, for example, everybody comes, everybody cares, everybody says, oh, we didn't know it was so bad. What's happening? We want to help you and so on. And typically, neither the patients or the environment are really aware of this process. It just happens, but the brain of these people then is taught that I need to do this behavior or to have the emotions at this level so that somebody listens or somebody responds. So it's important to know that this is just learned behavior. Nobody's being manipulative or something, it's just learned behavior. And last thing about invalidation is that it's a continuum from just simply misunderstanding. Most of the families actually are doing their best, but it's just hard to understand such emotional people and to react on them. But it's a continuum up to traumatic experiences like abuse and so on. Right. So coming back, it's about the both bidirectional thing between emotional sensitivity and validating. Of course, the higher are the emotions, the harder is to understand, and the bigger chance of invalidation, which leads to higher emotional intensity and so on. So the results are skills deficits, maladaptive emotional regulation strategies, of course, interpersonal problems, impulsivity, cognitive problems. A few words about the role of emotions on impulsivity and cognition. So these are basic things, but I think it's good to repeat them. So when we are in extreme emotions, what happens is that the quality of cognitive function decreases, which happens for all of us because emotions are automatic, are quicker than thinking, and brain prefers emotions over thinking. So this is important in patients with BPD because they are here all the time. So we need to think about that. And BPD patients often have different results in neutral and emotional conditions, and we need to account for the cognitive impairment under emotions. And impulsivity, again, impulsivity is a normal thing in extreme emotions. So imagine you're going on a pedestrian walk, and suddenly you see a car approaching really fast and not stopping. And in most people, what will happen is that you will instantly have very strong fear, and you will just run somewhere. Yeah, because if you were standing there and thinking that the car would run over you and you would be dead. So in these extreme situations, it's good to be impulsive because emotions enable us to act quickly. But again, patients with BPD are in extreme emotions, also in situations which are not that extreme. So when we speak about impulsivity in BPD, we typically speak about use of maladaptive strategies of emotion regulation, which are used impulsively under the influence of strong emotions as a attempt to regulate them, but they are maladaptive, which means that they have lots of negative consequences, including self-harming, suicidal behavior, but many other. We did a big study comparing impulsivity in BPD and ADHD, and what we found is that in ADHD there is a basic behavioral inhibition impairment and also cognitive functions impairment, which is present in both neutral and emotional conditions. However, in BPD, the cognitive impairment and the impulsivity is present only under emotional context. And the most crucial part of impulsivity for BPD is what we call negative urgency, which is the tendency to be impulsive under the influence of negative emotions. And this is very specific for BPD, is higher in BPD than in ADHD, and of course all the controls, and is associated with suicidality. So just to summarize from the perspective of social cognition now, so what we know is that patients with BPD have very poor recognition of their own emotions. And as we are on from self-knowledge to knowing others workshop, it's clear that when you cannot recognize well your emotions, it will be very hard to recognize others. And the recognition of others is typically biased by negative beliefs and expectations in patients with BPD. And what is a big problem is that they often take their thoughts as fact. Yeah. So when I meet with a friend on the street and they don't greet me, their typical thought would be, okay, so I must have done something terrible and he doesn't want to be my friend anymore. They just believe it's the fact. They don't go to the environment and check things. So this is the perspective taking problem. Also, what we know is that patients with BPD, when they see neutral facial expressions, they tend to think they're negative, as opposed to healthy people. Of course, they have high sensitivity to threat, abandonment, or in general trauma cues. And yes, we have said that. Okay, so now moving to the neurocorrelates of BPD. So what we know from current meta-analysis, anatomically, in patients with BPD have smaller amygdala and hippocampal volumes. It's a very stable finding. And again, it seems that it's not really specific to BPD diagnosis, but rather childhood maltreatment or trauma-exposed individuals. So these two structures are not that much developed. Functionally, however, amygdala typically is found to be hyperactive in patients with BPD, so it's smaller but hyperactive when exposed to emotional stimuli or in social situations. In the same time, another typical result is hypoactivation of different prefrontal areas, and this hyperactivation of amygdala and hypoactivation of prefrontal areas and lower connectivity between these areas is typically viewed as the basic neurocorrelate of emotion dysregulation in general. So again, this is not really BPD specific, this is emotion dysregulation specific. And another very stable result, according to meta-analysis, is that patients with BPD have hyperactive default mode network, and especially in, again, emotional and social situations. So it was described here yesterday that default mode network is kind of a mentalization network, and it seems that patients with BPD, they just really tend to think a lot about their role in situations, and mostly in the negative way, in self-negative way. So we did 2 studies recently on neurocorrelates in BPD, which I want to show you. So this is a very simple task where we presented emotional faces to people, and as compared to scrambled pictures like that in fMRI. So these both studies I will show you are on 30 patients with BPD as compared to 30 healthy controls. And what's interesting in this study that we didn't really find anything between the groups, which sounds surprising after everything I've said before. And here you can see the activation on the emotional faces versus scrambled pictures in the whole sample. So why I wanted to show you this is that though we have quite robust results from meta-analysis, sometimes it's not really easy to catch this in studies, in smaller samples. And there are actually many studies who fail to replicate the meta-analysis results. So the possible effects here can be, for example, of course, the medication status. You can see that our patients are heavily medicated, which is not good. And it doesn't really influence their symptoms, but there are studies which show that it influences their brain activity. And also other possible confounds in other studies can be that many studies compare negative and neutral faces, but we know that BPD people see neutral faces as negative faces, and so on. So it's not really easy to catch that. And what we also found was lower heart rate variability in BPD patients versus controls. So we might also sometimes think about including other physiological measures than fMRI, and lower heart rate variability again is very stable correlate of emotion dysregulation. So this study was published by my colleague Monika Radimecka. And the second task I want to show you is called Cyberball task, which I believe many of you know very well. So in this task, this is the participant, and he's playing a virtual game, ball tossing game with two other figures here. And in the task, you can simulate different conditions of inclusion or exclusion. So we did a block design. So there was always about, I think, half a minute of one block. And it was either exclusion, which means that the two figures were only tossing the ball to each other, but not to the participant. Inclusion, where they were all tossing quite in average to all three people there. And over inclusion, we also included, so this was where the two persons were only tossing to the participant, because there was a previous study which showed that patients with BPD actually feel included only once they're actually over included. So we wanted to look at that. So here you can see basically how pleasant or unpleasant people felt according to their rating after each block in these three conditions. So what you can see is that in both groups, people felt worse in exclusion versus inclusion, which is kind of a manipulation check of the task. And what we can see is that in general, BPD patients felt worse in all situations. So they just felt worse, no matter of the condition, than healthy controls. Regarding the fMRI results, so we found lower activity of hippocampus in exclusion versus inclusion condition in the BPD group. And it was associated with childhood maltreatment. So here we kind of get back to the theory and the previous results about the lower recruitment of hippocampus in people who went through childhood maltreatment. And what was also interesting is that we found smaller hippocampal volumes in patients with BPD. So again, we replicated what's been said before. And when we controlled for the volume in the analysis, then the difference between the groups was diminished. So again, this is quite methodologically important thing in fMRI studies, because BPD patients have smaller amygdala, have smaller hippocampus, and when you do an fMRI study and you do pre-processing and you normalize the structures, and then when you find differences between the groups, it might actually not be because the neurons are hypoactive or hyperactive, but just because there are a small number of neurons in the structure, because it's smaller, but we stretch it out in the pre-processing. And this was again published by my colleague Linhartová. So moving from the neurocorrelates to treatment. So pharmacotherapy in patients with BPD is only symptomatic, and there is no evidence of any pharmacotherapy being effective in BPD. So this is a quite important thing, and yet often patients with BPD are over-medicated, sedated basically, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't use medication in patients with BPD, but really only as a symptom aid for the current symptom, and we also need to account for the fact that the symptoms are changing, right? And the problem is that heavy medication can often prevent learning, emotion regulation, can prevent psychotherapy. On the other hand, the only causal treatment of BPD is psychotherapy, because the patients need to learn new skills, how to cope with their emotions, their self-concept and relationships. And we have several psychotherapies focused specifically on the treatment of BPD. And as I said, we are doing dialectical behavior therapy at our workplace, so I will speak about that a bit more. And then we have several neuroscience-based interventions which can serve as kind of a therapeutical aid for us. So let's start with the neurofeedback. So neurofeedback in general means that we have an acquisition device on a person which is measuring some biological signal, and this is processed in real time and projected in some form back to the participant. So you basically see your bodily activity, and you're using the real-time signal to learn how to influence it, how to influence your bodily neural activity. This is how it looks like in fMRI neurofeedback. So we have a person in the scanner. Here we analyze in real time the brain activity from a selected brain region or brain network or connectivity or whatever. And then you project it in some form back to the participant. So he's seeing the brain activity in the scanner and tries to influence it. This is how it looks in real time in our workplace. So we have the scanner here, acquisition computer. Here it's the real-time signal is computed, and this is what the participant sees. So in this case, there were emotional pictures, and what you can see here in the red color is part of a scale showing amygdala activity. And the task was to downregulate. So how can we present the brain activation? Often we just use a scale. So you just present a scale and tell the person try to downregulate the activity or upregulate according to what you want to do. But also you can be creative. So this is an example from a neurofeedback study in children with ADHD, where they saw a space rocket and their task was to send it to space. Yeah, to upregulate. Sorry. Yeah, so it works. Thank you. So often what we do in emotion regulation studies is that we present some pictures which evoke negative emotions. And what happens is that your amygdala activity will get higher, which probably happened. And then your task is to try to downregulate it. So learn how to regulate your amygdala activity when exposed to negative stimuli. And you can also, of course, do the opposite. This is my cat, by the way. And for example, there was one study which presented positive social interactions to people, and the task was to increase their positive emotionality or experience it during the prosocial situations, basically. So when you design a fMRI neurofeedback experiment, you need to or you can target basically anything. So you need to select a population, a brain region, a function, a symptom you want to influence, identify the brain region or network which is connected to it, localize it, and then just create a task which you want to use. And you can train people either in downregulation or upregulation of their brain regions. So the advantage of this, of course, is the high spatial resolution of MRI per se. So you can target any specific region. You could, for example, target TPJ and train people in social cognition, and we can really specifically connect it to specific symptoms or specific functions. disadvantages, of course, fMRI is very expensive, so the cost of doing this is very high. It's not really available as a clinical intervention, and we should be really sure that it works if we want to use it. So definitely in fMRI neurofeedback studies, it's important to include good control conditions and really to show that it's the neurofeedback which works and not just the, for example, emotion regulation training they are doing in the scanner. Here you can just see an overview of different disorders on which we have some studies which use the fMRI neurofeedback. And just a quick overview of the current results of fMRI neurofeedback in emotion regulation. So we know that it's pretty feasible to upregulate and downregulate your amygdala, and that neurofeedback helps with that over just the emotion regulation training. We know that also it's feasible to upregulate your prefrontal limbic connectivity, and we really have quite strong evidence of fMRI neurofeedback of amygdala upregulation during positive experiencing improves depression. Yeah, leads to improvement in patients with depression, and we also have some evidence about decreasing anxiety. So these are the two things where neurofeedback really seems to be effective. But in general, we have basically a few studies for each population, so we need more studies. Yeah, this is our review we published a few years ago, if you want to have a closer look. And so now we move to another of the treatment modalities, which is brain stimulation, and I will specifically talk about transcranial magnetic stimulation. So in RTMS, you take a magnetic coil and you, through a magnetic field, you stimulate directly a small part of a brain cortex, and based on the emotion regulation hypothesis in brain, the hypothesis behind RTMS use in BPD is that if we can increase excitability by RTMS in prefrontal cortex, it should actually improve the connectivity between prefrontal and limbic areas, and that could hypothetically improve emotion regulation in patients. So how is it in reality? Currently, we have 11 studies, which included in total 106 patients, and only 2 of them are sham controlled, so not many data. And what is interesting that each study is very different. So all the studies used targeted different brain regions, used different frequency of the stimulation, and so on, and they find the same results. So according to the current studies, it seems that RTMS is quite beneficial for patients with BPD. It improves many things. However, it's strange that basically you can stimulate anything, it seems, and you get these results. And of course, placebo effect is something we should be thinking here about, and we definitely need more placebo control studies. And when people go to RTMS, they typically, for example, in our projects, they go for 3 weeks, each day for 1 stimulation. So it's a lot of paying attention to them. We tell them they should sleep a lot, they shouldn't drink alcohol. We ask them how they are every day. So there are lots of interventions around the RTMS. So we definitely need placebo control studies, sham control studies. So we did the first study of brain correlates of RTMS use in BPD. It was on 14 patients with BPD. We use high-frequency stimulation of right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, 15 sessions with 1 stimulation per day. And we looked at some behavior effects, and then the brain results. We looked on the amygdala and connectivity during go-no-go tasks, so during impulsivity condition and during resting state. So what we found was clinically the same as the previous studies, so quite many things were improved after RTMS. And what we found in fMRI was that there was decreased amygdala connectivity with default network modes, which is quite interesting because, as we know, this is something we want in patients with BPD, because increased amygdala and DMN connectivity is related to many negative things and to BPD per se. It was also correlated with the decrease in impulsivity and depression. So yeah, and the last thing, we didn't find any changes in the amygdala DLPFC connectivity. So we found something completely else that we didn't expect, but it makes sense. It's correlated with the behavioral change, so it might be some mechanism of how this works. But yeah, how does it work through our DLPFC stimulation? We don't really know. All right, so now moving to psychotherapy from the neuroscience-based interventions. So for you who are not familiar with DBT, just a quick overview. DBT is a complex therapeutical program specifically designed to treat people with emotional dysregulation who are chronically suicidal and self-harming. And it includes these 4 modalities. So you have individual therapy once per week. You have skills training, which is done in group, which is in our program twice per week. You have phone coaching, so you help patients to apply the skills they learn in their life. And you have teamwork, because many therapists work in long-term with patients with BPD burnout. So it's also important to take care for yourself so that you can be effective therapist for your patients. Here you can see the skills areas which the patients learn in the BT groups. So the basic is mindfulness. So we need to get them more aware of themselves. Instead of the suppression and inhibition they used to do. They're of course taught how to manage crisis situations, but most importantly how to regulate their emotions in healthy ways and how to be effective in interpersonal situations. As you can see, we have excessively long waiting time, but fortunately its implementation of DBT in Czech Republic is increasing, so I hope that this will get lower. But we had the first complex healthcare DBT program in Czech Republic, so our waiting time is very high. So that. So what do we know about DBT effectiveness? So we know that it leads to decrease of self-harming and suicidal behavior, depression, anxiety, hopelessness, anger, impulsivity. Of course, again, it depends on control condition. But what do we know is that DBT is most effective in patients with life-threatening behaviors. So it's obviously not the only therapy that works, but it seems to work best in the worst patients. So I want to show some results from a study of the effectiveness of our own program. So we included 3 patient groups. Of course, patients who underwent the DBT program, which lasts 6 months at our clinic. Then BPD control patients. Most of them were receiving regular individual psychotherapy, which is important for the interpretation of the results, and a healthy control sample. And we measured them before DBT, then in the middle of DBT only for the DBT group to see how the effect develops. Then after 6 months, which was at the end of the DBT, and we have 1 follow-up after another 6 months. So all our patients need to meet the inclusion criteria for the program. So emotion dysregulation and suicidal or self-harming behavior in past 6 months. Otherwise, we have almost no exclusion conditions. So what we measured, quite many questionnaires focused on different specific symptoms of BPD. Then ecological momentary assessment. I will walk you through that later. And the two tasks I presented to you, we measured before and after DBT. I don't have the results yet. They're under analysis. So maybe some next time we can speak about the effect of DBT on the brain or on the fMRI. So when we look at the self-reported results, so this is the borderline symptom list, so in all the graphs you can see before DBT, after DBT, in the middle of DBT, and the T2 is only for the DBT group. It wasn't measured in the other groups. The blue line are healthy controls, green line are DBT patients, yellow line are control BPD patients. So we can see that the general borderline symptoms decreased in the first half and further in the second half. So we also think that the length of the therapy is quite reasonable here, because the symptoms really improve much more in the second half of the program. And you can see quite similar results in all other scales. So this is emotion dysregulation, again decreased after first 3 months and more after the second 3 months. The same for depression and anxiety. We didn't have significant results. This is impulsivity, again the same results. Dissociation not significant, but the trend is very similar. And these two are sensitivity to rejection. So the anxiety associated with sensitivity with rejection and how much you expect you'll be rejected. So as you can see, this improved in the second half. So it seems that the interpersonal variables really need more time. And we also measured some positive things because in general, the psychotherapy research focuses a lot on measuring how the negative things decrease, but we also want to measure whether we are creating something positive. So this is reasons for living scale. So we can see that self-reported reasons for living increased in our patients. And this is very nice. This is mindfulness. And you can see that in mindfulness, which is the basic skill we teach the patients. So we really should see this, but it's nice that they're almost at the healthy level here after the BT program. No significant results whatsoever in the control BPD group. So we can summarize, it's quite effective. And as I said, the BPD control group, they had their own individual therapy. So it's important to take this into account. Now, the ecological momentary assessment, we like more and more, because when we speak about emotional variability, of course, this is the direct measure of the variability time. So our patients rated their current emotion for 2 consecutive days, and they have a prompt each hour from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So they chose their current emotion, they rated their the intensity of the emotion, and their subjective emotional control over this emotion. And then in the analysis, we divided the emotions to pleasant, unpleasant, and indefinite. Indefinite means I don't know what I feel or I cannot describe it. And we tested the differences in frequency, intensity, and control in these 3 categories of emotions. So these are results of the frequency of emotions. So we have found that in the DBT group, frequency of pleasant emotions increased and frequency of indefinite emotions decreased. So this is really good to see that we actually build some positive experiencing in patients and that their emotional clarity is increasing. No significant results in the other groups. This is for intensity. So here we can see that after DBT, intensity of negative emotions decreased, which is also something we want to see because often these emotions are too intense for the actual situation. And in perceived emotional control, you can see it increased after DBT for all the 3 emotional categories. No differences in the other groups. Yeah. So these results are currently under review by my PhD student Monika Rodimecka. And as I said, we currently analyze the fMRI differences before and after DBT and also the follow-up. So we will have more results from this study later. Just a few words about our future direction. So now we're doing another RTMS study, which is sham controlled study. So about 1 year from now, we should have the sham controlled results from the RTMS, which I'm very curious about. And we also try to combine RTMS with DBT, which is not going well, because it seems that once patients start in DBT, they are not really motivated to combine it with something else, and it's very time consuming and everything. Of course, we collaborate with Henrik's group, also our interest now is the common features in BPD and psychotic patients, because currently the awareness of the fact that BPD patients often have psychotic symptoms is growing. So we want to have a look on this transdiagnostic features of that. I think that in social cognition, as well as emotional regulation, the ecological momentary assessment really is important for us to use. So we will use it in our future studies as well, because as you saw in the DBT study, you can really see the degree of variability in daily life, and it's just a different information than when you just fill up a questionnaire once under specific time circumstances. Okay, so many thanks to our DBT team and research team, and to you for your attention. That's all for me.